A new report claims to reveal when Leslye Headland's The Acolyte series will have worse numbers than Ahsoka and all the other Disney Plus live action Star Wars shows. It also provides some details about what we can expect from the series. Before we get into this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. That out of the way, let's get into this. This is over at thatparkplace.com. We have this report from Collider and their writer, Arizo Amin. He said, Collider has learned that the live-action High Republic set series from creator Leslye Headland is set to release on Disney Plus this summer. So it's going to be here this year, and in 4 months, 3-4 months, it should be here. Maybe a little bit later. Can't wait to see how that one will fare. I can predict it will do terribly. I don't think people are interested in seeing this show whatsoever. Not only did the report provide a release window, but it appeared to share new details about the series, claiming it, quote, will follow a former Jedi Padawan and her one-time master as they fall into an investigation of sinister crimes in an ever-changing galaxy. So that sounds absolutely awful. I'm so sick of this dumb, stupid trope about I'm leaving the Jedi because the Jedi suck. And I actually was going to, I knew that the dark side was rising and all this stuff. So I'm going to go investigate it. Like, just stop it. Please stop this stuff. It's not creative. It's not imaginative. It's the same thing over and over and over again. They're just copying Ahsoka's arc from the Clone Wars and turning it into live action and setting it in the quote unquote High Republic era that the Walt Disney Company made out of thin air for their terrible publishing initiative. This just does not sound interesting at all. I have no interest in anything that's going to be happening in this, especially the fact that it's a former Jedi Padawan now. I don't know. I'm just. She's going to be rebellious. She's going to be probably the girl boss, and it's just going to be insufferable cringe. That is my prediction. That's my prediction. What I found interesting about this report is the timing of it. It does come in the wake of Leslye Headland being named in Gina Carano's lawsuit against the Walt Disney Company and Lucasfilm. So one might think that the Walt Disney Company and Lucasfilm decided to drop a little something for Collider, so they can maybe distract people from the news that Leslye Headland was involved in the harassment of Gina Carano and that she was going to be taking part in the struggle session that they wanted Gina Carano to take part in before they eventually fired her. The lawsuit accused Headland, as I just said, accused Headland of partaking in the harassment of Carano via backing a GoFundMe campaign. She was also said to partake in the struggle session being led by Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy. So I'm wondering if there was indeed a reason why they decided to maybe leak this information to Collider instead of maybe, announcing it during the company's first quarter earnings report webcast, which just happened last week. The show was mentioned, but it was only mentioned once. And Disney CEO Bob Iger said this. Looking ahead, we have an exciting slate of originals coming to Disney Plus, including Agatha from Marvel Studios, Skeleton Crew and the Acolyte from Lucasfilm, Win or Lose from Pixar, and much more. He did not provide any dates or anything like that. He just says that they are coming up sometime this year. So it's kind of weird that you wouldn't maybe announce the date then, rather have it leaked through Collider. And I think that probably has to do with the fact that Leslye Headland is named in Gina Carano's lawsuit, and it's not positively. As for the show, this is what Leslye Headland told Entertainment Weekly about it. She says, we're looking at a timeline where there is peace throughout the galaxy, and it was very challenging and interesting to make a Star Wars with no war in it. So the question became, well, what should the show be about if it's not going to be about galactic conflict? So the whole premise here is just utterly ridiculous. We do know that in the prequels that George made, there clearly was galactic conflict, and it had been building up probably for a number of years. We do know the Jedi were dispatched to handle disputes between major institutions and organizations within the Galactic Republic. It would not be that difficult to create maybe a civil war erupting on some type of planet, and the Jedi are sent to try and quell the war and bring peace to the planet and reunite them with the Republic, etc., etc. I mean, it's really not that hard to to find ways to have the Jedi intervene in a so-called time of peace. It just isn't that difficult to use your imagination. And the fact that they're saying it's challenging is just utterly ridiculous. I mean, I just thought of that off the top of my head. It's not challenging at all, and there's a lot of other things that you can do. Nevertheless, she goes on and says, so the question became, well, what should the show be about if it's not going to be about galactic conflict? Maybe that's just it's just weird. It's like, did they not? They had no clue what they were doing. They just knew the time period they were going to set it in. They knew who they were going to cast. It sounds like it all came from like DEI initiatives rather than any kind of like, here's this cool story that we have. Where can we set this in Star Wars? How can we do this? This is really cool. Let's do this. It really sounds like they wanted to do High Republic setting. They had what the cast would look like, the characters would look like, all of this stuff. And then they were going to write a story around all of that, trying to connect it. That's probably how they do things over there. I would not be surprised. The most recent Amazon stuff that Chris Gore over at Film Threat has uncovered seems to indicate that's what Amazon is doing. And one need look no further than Rings of Power and Wheel of Time to see how that has fared. Absolutely atrocious. One also needs to look further than like the Marvels and everything that Disney's been doing the past couple of years. Nevertheless, Headland goes on and says, and I think that what makes this show different and interesting is that it's from the perspective of the bad guys or the villains of Star Wars. That's not interesting. It's not interesting at all. I'm not trying to see a Star Wars show from the perspective of the villains. It's just not really interesting to me whatsoever. These are people who are using the Force in their own way, dipping into the darker sides of the Force, and are doing it without being sanctioned by the larger institution, which in this case is the Jedi. She then shared, I think that Star Wars is always about some version of the underdog versus the institution. No, it's not. It's ridiculous. Sure, you have Luke rebelling against the Galactic Empire, and you can see that in the original trilogies for sure. That kind of rebellion, but I don't see that at all in the prequels. The prequels is all about suppressing the Separatists, and the Separatists being manipulated and moved as pawns by ne'er-do-wells, aka the Emperor and his minions, such as Count Dooku and General Grievous. I would not call them the underdogs versus the institution. You wouldn't describe the Emperor and Sidious as the underdogs. It's just ridiculous. But she goes on and says, and I just thought it was very interesting to do a show about the bad guys. And it said that during that time period made the most sense. So I think that's what sets it apart. It's kind of almost flipped. We have more Jedi than you've seen in any of the Star Wars content. But at the same time, I think you see more morally ambiguous characters than you've seen in other Star Wars content. I'm also sick of this trend as well. If you're watched this channel, you know that I'm just sick and tired of morally ambiguous characters. It's clearly them just trying to make you believe in the idea of relativism, which any kind of examination of it pulls apart. It just doesn't work. And then she concluded and says, and I think I can say this pretty confidently, I don't think you're going to see action in other shows the way you see it used and utilized in our show. Believe it when I see it. I doubt it will have better action than, say, Daredevil from Netflix. And so we also have some comments from some of the members of the cast. We have actress Jodie Turner-Smith also telling Entertainment Weekly that the series is, quote, part of a wave of more inclusive and beautifully represented Star Wars shows. So that felt really cool. And I felt the importance of that, especially in some of the stuff that I got to where everyone really was excited about what they were seeing and what that would maybe mean for different fans that don't necessarily look like what you normally think the traditional Star Wars fan looks like. I wonder what she thinks the traditional Star Wars fan looks like. That's kind of interesting, right? She's the one seemingly making the assumptions there. Or she is making the assumptions. And again, this kind of goes to the point that I was making a little bit earlier. This show is crafted out of DEI first. Has nothing to do with actually telling a decent, solid story. It's all about pushing the messages, whether that's in the casting, whether that's in the setting that they want to tell. It's all about the message here. And then obviously telling it from the perspective of the villain and having all these morally ambiguous characters, that's obviously part of the agenda and message. But Jodie Turner-Smith goes on and says, because if there's anything that I learned from this show, it's that the Star Wars fan is varied. So she's talking about not what you normally think. She's talking about look what you normally think the traditional Star Wars fan looks like. And then she's contradicting herself in the next sentence saying that the Star Wars fan is varied. So kind of confusing there. It doesn't really make any sense. And then Turner Smith wasn't the only one to kind of talk about this, use identity politics to promote the series. Charlie Barnett also told Entertainment Weekly, I don't think I could have ever imagined myself as a Jedi. Yes, one, because I was not reflected for so many times throughout these films in the past. That's an utter lie. There's plenty of, even if you want to go with his ridiculous version or his ridiculous idea of just his skin color, look at Mace Windu. Definitely was around in the early 2000s, and this guy's probably in his late 20s. So he was a child when those movies were coming out. So he's just straight up lying here. And even if you don't look at that, anyone can relate to the morals and principles of the characters in the original trilogy, as well as a lot of the characters in the prequels. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Qui-Gon Jinn. You can just Mace Windu, Yoda, Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, etc., Lando. It's not hard to find characters in Star Wars to relate to outside of skin tone. And then he goes on and says, but it was also something that didn't equate to my mind. I don't know about you guys as well. So to see such a diverse group played out now, I know that it's going to be a healthy reflection on so many other young people and old people. No ageism allowed in this. It's Star Wars. We can all fit. I think it's going to be really impactful. It's going to be a cool moment for me for sure. I can tell you that. So this show is going to be an utter disaster. I think based on all these interviews, it's clear that from the ground up, this was built as a DEI, the show. And when it arrives, I guess in summer of this year, it's going to probably post the worst viewership of any live action Star Wars series. I would not be surprised if it's on Miss Marvel levels of viewership. But let me know what you make of it coming out in the summer, those plot details, and what these folks have said about the show. Let me know in the comments below. Remember to always be charitable, but to always speak the truth.